And that's also to do with the fact that there's some varieties of presuppositionalism which are incompatible with one another. They are completely different. They're antithetical to one another. And so you've got some people that consider, say, presupposition. They consider a presupposition like a mathematical axiom. An axiom is just an unprovable first principle that you start with. So you've got, like, say, axioms of Euclidean geometry. They're just things you take as read. That's another phrase you'll hear. Take as read. That means that they're just things that you consider unprovable, but they're your starting points. And the reason why Euclidean geometry was those axioms are considered satisfactory is because using Euclidean geometry we can describe the natural world really well, and that's why people those principles seem to work really well. They help us describe the world, they understand the world, and so in a sense that sort of like apologetic view says that if this is successful in our understanding, if this helps us understand the world and helps us to then that's acceptable. So you see that sort of like so. And mathematics, in a sense, is a discipline that's most famous for its axioms. But people would say philosophical axioms. So that's what they're doing. They're saying, well, this is my starting point. I'm assuming this. And if this helps with this, and if these axioms are correct, then it means that whatever reasoning that I deduce from those first principles, so it's often very deductive, then if that works and helps me describe the world, that's great. So that's one form of presuppositionalism. So people aren't trying to say you can't, but that's the point, is that you can't justify your axioms. There's no way you can't go further back. So the instant objection people are going to have is going to say, well, if you can't justify your axioms, why necessarily should we believe them? Can't we? If we come up with a different set of axioms and we can describe reality satisfactory to as we think, and we think it's working, then who's to judge between your axioms and my axioms? And in a sense, that is one of the arguments around that sort of axiomatic view of philosophy, because in the work of Quine, he often talks about that. He often talks about sort of like the under-attestation of a theory, and he just basically says, well, you can pick, as long as a theory is empirically adequate, in other words, it describes the reality, what your aspect of reality you're looking at. If the theory, when you apply it, satisfactorily describes what you're trying to describe, that's okay. If another theory is empirically adequate as well, then that's okay too. So it's a way of handling sort of. It might be that when you go further on and you're trying to describe something else, then you later find that one of those theories isn't empirically adequate, and therefore you discard that theory. And if the other theory and another theory replaces it, so that's part of the mix there of sort of like of using axioms. And if something's empirically adequate, that's fine. Now, many philosophers, including myself, find that unsatisfactory, because it's not just that something's empirically adequate and describes things well. You want to understand, well, if a theory works really well, doesn't that say that something about that theory is describing the world as the way it really is? And that's a thought to pause there. But that's something that's, you want to understand, what is it? It's like if you had 5 or 6 different theories and they all seem to be empirically adequate, you're saying, well, what's in common with all those theories? Is there a common principle in those theories that is telling me why they seem to be working? And that to me is one of the reasons why what philosophers should be doing. You should be not just saying, oh well, this is just empirically adequate. We want to answer, well, why is it empirically adequate? What? Go that level underneath, or dig a little bit further. Modern 20th century philosophy, particularly naturalism, naturalistic view, doesn't like that. It just says if it's empirically adequate, let's just stop there. The search for first principles is considered, that's considered medieval. That's considered that's beyond the reach of philosophy. So again, there's going to be things we'll consider more, because they are really great discussions to have, and I hope that's provocative in the sense. I hope that you think, I hope to stimulate people to read more. But other forms of presuppositions are not necessarily axiomatic, but they're what you would call hypothetical, and so they're very scientific in a sense. They're just saying, we have a hypothesis about the world, and we believe that Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, we are believing that each of them has a hypothesis that attempts to describe the world, and we're now actually going to show, right, by taking those as our first principles, we are arguing that our hypothesis is more effective at describing reality than your hypothesis. And I think it was Carnell, who was one of the hypothetical sort of like Christian apologists. He sort of said let the one with the greatest hypothesis win. And so he was saying, bring it all on, and may the one who has the greatest hypothesis win. And so that's again very much influenced by science, very much influenced by evidentialism. It's different than evidentialism, so it's not so much concerned with evidence. It's more trying to say that we've got some sort of hypothesis. We believe we can trace it. Obviously, we'll use evidence. It will use deduction, but it's a very much say, right, this is a hypothesis. You got a hypothesis. Let's fight. Let's see which one is most effective. Now, another form of presuppositionalism, which is probably the one that's close, that's one that sort of I feel is most valuable, is a presuppositionalism which is basically what you would call transcendentalist. So it derives its power from the transcendentalist view. So it's actually saying that what do you have to assume? You remember we talked a little bit about this, didn't we, in a previous video? Transcendentalism was associated with Immanuel Kant, first of all, and he was trying to come up with an explanation for how can we describe reality, and then what do we have to assume to be able to describe reality in any way at all? What is it that makes the knowledge of objects in themselves possible at all? How are we going? What is it? What do we have to? What are we assuming? So he was trying to come up with some sort of just explanation of how it was possible to have knowledge of objects at all. So his answer, in a sense, was a psychological apparatus. We have a psychological apparatus. Those psychological apparatuses give us certain categories of the understanding. I'm not sure how many there were, maybe 10 or 11 he had, and different categories of understanding which are every human being has these. It's part of their makeup. It's part of their mental, and so in a sense, the mind constructs the objects of reality, of our constructs the very objects of the understanding, and so the sort of like the Christian variation on that, because in a sense, many people have problems with Kant. If Kant was correct, he is the turning point of Western philosophy. There's no doubt about that. He wanted to address shortcomings of rationalism, the shortcomings of empiricism, and he in a sense is considered the turning point of Western philosophy. So his view, of saying that there's what we would call the phenomenal world, which is the world of nature, a world of, in a sense, the physical world. But he had something that he called, well, that's the phenomena is the realm of science, because he wanted to deal with the skepticism of Hume, who had sort of got rid, who basically completely ended up destroying science when trying to apply the empirical assumption to it. He just said, well, there's no reasonable justification for reason, therefore our whole scientific enterprise just falls apart. It's just arbitrary. It's just all to do with custom. And even though Hume was, considered a great empiricist, he was actually very destructive to empiricism, to the degree that Russell in the 20th century was just lamenting. It's in his History of Western Philosophy, he talks about Hume and he just says this is just terrible, it's horrible, but he doesn't offer any argument. It's to refute Hume, because he can't, because Hume's reasoning is correct on the constraints that Hume talks about. Pure empiricism, you can't. You just destroy yourself. You eat yourself. And so the next, in a sense, what presuppositionalism is adopting is the Christian form of transcendentalism, which said that the reason why, the central thought of it is that the reason why, say, we can reconcile particulars with universals, which is probably one of the most important philosophical distinctions that has been through the history of philosophy, and it's proved one of the most difficult for people to resolve. It's because you're saying, well, how? Because some people will say, you just imagine, you've got, say, Huey, Dewey and Louie, who are three ducks in the pond. I'm using that because I'm thinking of, I will give a hat tip to Dr. Bunsen for this illustration, because I think it's such a great illustration. You've got Huey and Dewey and the three ducks on the pond. Now, when you say they're a duck, what you're doing is you're saying, oh, there's some sort of abstraction from those particulars which gives you the universal of the duck. And so people have actually asked, Plato was one of the first to ask this question. He was saying, well, the concept of duck, is the concept of duck something real in itself, or is it just a convenient linguistic label that you wrap around? Somebody who says it's just a convenient linguistic label is somebody what you would call a nominalist. And there's been some very famous nominalists in the history of philosophy that just say, "Oh, it's just to do with the way we talk. That's just a convenient linguistic label." And but Plato said, no, that form of duckness is somewhere. It's in some metaphysical realm. It's not in the physical realm, but it exists as a real object, but outside the physical realm. So it's very famous. He's saying that there's something behind. It's like his famous cave analogy. We're seeing shadows on the wall, but the real is somewhere else. And so, whereas Aristotle said that the mind is a psychological process in the mind which abstracts the form from the particular. So it abstracts the universal from the particular. It's like a mirror. It's like a mirror image. Which Plato is saying that the real world, the physical world, it's like an instantiation of this form that exists in this other world. Because Plato wanted to ensure objectivity. He wanted to say that this is actually something real. There are real objective elements of the universe. He wanted to deal with relativism and subjectivity of knowledge. He wanted to say that knowledge is objective. So that's one of those key principles. And one of the reasons why objectivity in the history of philosophy has been so challenged is because that his resolution of the problem of how do you guarantee objectivity relies on this sort of idea of this strange world, or ever otherworldly idea of a world outside of our the phenomenal world. It's something else. And so for Aristotle, he wasn't happy with that. He didn't like that sort of like idea, and he said, but he basically still accepted the basic taxonomy of Plato, and actually said, yes, you have these things called universals, you have particulars, and you want, but the mind operates on the particular and extracts out the universal from it. And so that's so problematic, sort of like philosophical, the idea that somehow the universal is embedded in the particular and your mind sort of sorts that out. It's a very problematic concept with Aristotle, which is one of the reasons why it's considered, it's not a satisfactory sort of solution to that sort of like problem. But this problem of particular, how to reconcile the particular and the universal, has been something it's one of those things that's been revisited so many times in philosophy. And so, in a sense, the Christian transcendental approach, this is what it makes Christian theology and the Christian solution so unique, because in one of the core transcendentals of the Christian understanding of God is the Trinity. Now, what is the Trinity? The Trinity is considered Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so you have one God, but you have three persons. And so you have a universal and a particular perfectly reconciled. And so that is not the case in Islam. Even though Islam is monotheistic, it's different. It's people, in fact, they consider the Trinity a heretical concept. It's an interesting question to say that the Trinity was a interesting argument to have, that the Trinity was actually something that perhaps was not properly understood until the 3rd, 4th century of Christian thought. But it's something that, nevertheless, it's something that's you can, I believe, especially in say the Gospel of John, you can have you've got a very strong Trinitarian understanding. And even if you dig into the Hebrew in the first chapter of Genesis, you're seeing plurals and things where you wouldn't, and God says, "Let us," when he uses the us, so that's an interesting, there's lots of evidence that suggests a Trinitarian understanding. But the Christian transcendental, what makes, this is one of my central arguments within what I argue within my thesis, is that that's the Christian transcendental, the Christian form of presuppositionalism, the most rigorous one. Because there's Christians who've tried to use the hypothetical view, the evidential view, the other forms of apologetics, but I believe presupposition is strongest because it uses this idea that by reconciling the particular and the universal in the Trinitarian concept, you are guaranteeing all the other transcendentals that say things like causality, which are sort of, if you like, second order, or whether there's things that are derived from this reconciliation of particular and universal. They give even just they allow for the possibility of language. That's it, and for meaning to be in language. You see, because one of the most some of the most loudest people in philosophy in our contemporary period over the last, say, 20, 30 years have been people that deny that there's any sort of structure. They're called deconstructionists for this reason. They're denying, they're just saying any sort of meaning and resident meaning and conceptualization in his language is very much arbitrary. It's very much to do with the interests of the person that's writing. There can be no meaning, intrinsic, immanent meaning to anything.